Lara Wynn had made many questionable decisions in her 32 years of life, but teaching apex predator cubs about human affection customs might have been her worst yet. The Krexai research station orbited a gas giant in the Terminus sector, far from Earth's comfortable gravity, and even farther from common sense. Lara served as the xenobiology liaison, which was a fancy way of saying she was the only human willing to work with species that could theoretically eat her. The pay was exceptional. The hazard insurance was better. She'd been assigned to study the Varkesh, a species of massive, scaled predators whose homeworld made Earth's Jurassic period look like a petting zoo. Adult Varkesh stood 3 meters tall, possessed retractable claws that could shred titanium, and had jaw strength that made crocodiles seem cute by comparison. Their society was built on hunting prowess, territorial dominance, and a strict hierarchical structure that confused most galactic anthropologists. The cubs, however, were different. Lara had been warned that young Varkesh were dangerous, unpredictable, and absolutely not to be socialized using human behavioral frameworks. She'd nodded along during the safety briefing, signed all the liability waivers, and promptly ignored every single warning the moment she met them. There were 7 cubs in the station's observation habitat, each roughly the size of a lion cub, but with scales that shimmered like oil on water, and eyes that tracked movement with unsettling precision. They'd been orphaned during a territorial dispute standard, Varkesh politics, and the research team was studying their development in a controlled environment. Paku had been the first to approach her. The smallest of the litter, he possessed a curiosity that overrode his predatory instincts. While his siblings maintained a wary distance, Paku had waddled up to the observation barrier, tilted his angular head, and made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a growl. Lara had done what any rational human would do. She'd cooed at him like he was a puppy. The other xenobiologists, all properly cautious species from worlds where predators were respected and feared, had been horrified. The Krexai station director, a 4-armed Quellan named Vesisik, had actually filed an incident report, but Paku had responded to Lara's attention with something that looked suspiciously like joy, and that had sealed her fate. Over the following weeks, Lara had gradually introduced the cubs to human concepts of pack bonding. She'd started small, sitting near the barrier, talking to them in soft tones, demonstrating non-threatening body language. The cubs had responded with increasing boldness, eventually allowing her into their habitat under strict supervision. Then came the mistake. During one session, Paku had bounded over with his usual enthusiasm, and Lara, operating on pure human instinct, had wrapped her arms around him in a hug. The cub had frozen, every muscle tense, and for 3 terrifying seconds, Lara had thought she'd become the galaxy's stupidest statistic. Then Paku had relaxed, pressed his scaled head against her shoulder, and made a rumbling sound that vibrated through her entire chest. The other cubs had watched with predatory focus. Lara could practically see the gears turning in their developing brains. Within a day, they'd figured out that hugs meant attention, affection, and that pleasant rumbling sensation when a human made happy noises. Within 3 days, they'd weaponized the concept. Now, 2 months later, Lara couldn't sit down without being ambushed. She'd learned to recognize the signs. The sudden silence in the habitat was the first warning. 7 young predators simultaneously stopping their play and focusing on her with laser precision. Paku would go stock still, his tail twitching at the tip. The others would fan out, surrounding her position with the coordinated precision of hunters who'd been perfecting pack tactics since birth. Then Paku would charge. The impact knocked her backward every time. 70 kilograms of scaled muscle and juvenile enthusiasm slammed into her chest, followed immediately by the other 6 cubs piling on in what they'd apparently decided was the correct execution of a group hug. Claws still developing but sharp enough to be concerning, would carefully grip her clothing. Scaled heads would nuzzle against her shoulders, stomach, arms, anywhere they could reach. The rumbling purr of 7 content predators created a sound that made the observation equipment malfunction. Vesisik had demanded she stop encouraging this behavior. The other researchers had cited at least 15 protocol violations. The Varkesh ambassador had called it a disgrace to proper predator dignity. Lara had tried to comply. Really, she had, But the cubs had discovered that if they looked at her with those huge, slit-pupilled eyes and made their particular plaintive chirping sound, she would cave within seconds. Paku was especially skilled at this, having perfected a head tilt that somehow conveyed both devastating cuteness and the promise of tactical ambush. The incident reports piled up. Human demonstrates inappropriate bonding behavior with apex predator juveniles. Subject Win continues to encourage pack hunting behavior directed at herself. Cubs now consider human a valid, tackle target containment concerns growing, but something interesting had started happening. The cubs' social development had accelerated beyond typical Varkesh parameters. They demonstrated cooperation, empathy, and problem-solving skills that shouldn't emerge until adolescence. They'd begun to show protective behavior toward Lara, positioning themselves between her and anything they perceived as threatening, including the station director during one memorable confrontation. The Varkesh ambassador had returned for a second visit, this time with their clutch leader, a scarred veteran named Kreshal, who'd survived 40 years of territorial warfare. Lara had expected condemnation, possibly termination of the program. Instead, Kreshal had watched through the observation barrier as Paku initiated another tackle hug, followed by the inevitable puppy pile. The massive Varkesh had been silent for a long moment, scaled face unreadable. "This is not our way," Kreshal had finally said, voice like grinding stone. But perhaps. The clutch leader's eyes had tracked the cubs, watching how they coordinated, how they communicated, how they'd formed a genuine pack bond rather than a hierarchy of dominance. Perhaps our way is not the only way. Now, as Lara sat in the habitat for her daily session, she braced herself. Paku's tail was already twitching. The other cubs had gone silent. She had approximately 3 seconds before impact. "All right, you little monsters," she muttered, unable to suppress her smile. "Let's do this." The tackle came with perfect precision. Scales and claws and purring and joy crashed into her. And Lara Wynn, xenobiology liaison, protocol violator, and the galaxy's most irresponsible human laughed as she was buried beneath 7 predator cubs, who'd learned that sometimes the best way to show affection was a proper group hug, even if it meant nobody was sitting down safely anymore.